Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Allow your body to sink gently into the surface beneath you. Feel the tension of the day melt away as your mind begins to drift into calmness. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of time itself, where the dawn of human history whispers its ancient secrets. As the stars shimmer softly above, we will travel together to a place long forgotten by most, yet one that holds the key to the very roots of civilization. Let your thoughts float gently like clouds across a tranquil sky as I guide you through the beginning of a remarkable story, a story of creation, discovery, and human ambition unfolding in the lands of ancient Sumer. The story of the Sumerian civilization begins in a time so distant, so remote from our own, that it almost feels like a dream. More than 5,000 years ago, in the fertile plains between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a people emerged whose ideas, innovations, and struggles would shape the destiny of humanity. This region, now part of modern-day Iraq, was known in ancient times as Mesopotamia, a name that simply means the land between rivers. But this vast expanse of land, with its fertile soil and unpredictable floods, was more than just geography. It was the cradle of a civilization, the first spark of human society in the form we recognize today. Long before empires and kings, before mighty monuments and towering ziggurats, there was the quiet awakening of the Sumerians. Their story begins not as conquerors, but as humble farmers. The land was both a blessing and a curse. Each year the Tigris and Euphrates would swell with water, nourishing the earth, but often overwhelming the villages with devastating floods. The Sumerians had to learn the delicate balance of working with nature rather than against it. They began to construct canals and dikes, systems that controlled the floods and directed the water to where it was needed most. These simple yet ingenious innovations allowed them to produce surplus crops, barley, wheat, dates, feeding not only themselves but giving rise to the possibility of towns, trade, and complex societies. At first, the Sumerians lived in small agricultural communities. These early settlements were modest clusters of mud brick houses, where families toiled under the scorching Mesopotamian sun. Yet slowly, as irrigation methods improved and population grew, these villages expanded into larger towns and eventually into city-states. The first of these great Sumerian cities was Eridu, considered by many to be the world's first city. Eridu was a place of sacred reverence, where people believed the gods had first descended to walk among men. Over time, other cities flourished: Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur, each becoming centers of culture, trade, and political power. Uruk stands out as particularly significant in this ancient landscape. It was one of the largest and most influential cities of Sumer, and some scholars even suggest that the epic tales of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest known works of literature, originated there. The city's walls stretched over several kilometers, enclosing temples, markets, and grand homes. Central to Uruk's rise was its complex administrative system, driven by the earliest known use of writing, cuneiform. The Sumerians did not invent writing for the sake of expression alone. It was a practical tool born from the need to manage trade, record transactions, and organize society. Cuneiform began as simple pictographs, drawings representing objects like sheep, grain, or clay jars. As trade expanded and more complex systems of exchange developed, these pictographs evolved into wedge-shaped marks impressed upon clay tablets using a stylus. The process may seem rudimentary, but it marked a revolutionary step in human communication. Suddenly, information could be recorded, preserved, and transmitted across generations. The ability to write allowed for the codification of laws, the chronicling of history, and the management of vast agricultural and economic enterprises. Among the most remarkable achievements of the Sumerians was the codification of law. Long before Hammurabi's Code of Babylon, the Sumerians established written legal principles to govern behavior, property rights, trade regulations, and family relations. These early laws were not merely suggestions, but carried the authority of the temple and the king. Justice was seen as a divine mandate, reflecting the will of the gods. It was the king's duty, often referred to as the lugal, to ensure that order prevailed, and that the weak were protected from the strong. But the Sumerians were not merely farmers and scribes. They were also keen observers of the world around them. They looked to the heavens and tracked the movements of stars, planets, and the phases of the moon. The first steps toward astronomy and mathematics can be traced back to their scribes, who meticulously recorded celestial events and seasonal changes. Their counting system was based on the number 60, a base that surprises many in our modern decimal age, but continues to shape us to this day, particularly in how we measure time and angles. Religion permeated every aspect of Sumerian life. They believed the world was controlled by a pantheon of gods, each responsible for different aspects of existence. Anu, the god of the sky, Enlil, god of air and storms, and Enki, god of water and wisdom, were among the most revered. The Sumerians did not see the gods as distant beings. Rather, the gods were directly involved in the lives of people. Every action, every decision was thought to ripple across the divine realm. To ensure favor and protection, people built ziggurats, massive stepped towers that soared toward the heavens, where priests would perform rituals and offer sacrifices. These ziggurats were not only religious centers but also symbols of political power, as they often stood in the heart of the city. Trade was another cornerstone of Sumerian society. The fertile plains alone could not provide all the materials necessary for their growth. The Sumerians traded extensively with neighboring regions, importing timber from the Levant, copper from Oman, and precious stones from the Iranian plateau. Trade networks spread far and wide, and the Sumerians became adept merchants, negotiating deals, managing logistics, and creating early systems of credit. Markets bustled with activity, where farmers, artisans, and traders exchanged goods and services. Merchants maintained meticulous clay records of transactions, inventory, and debts, giving rise to one of the world's first commercial practices. Despite these achievements, life in Sumer was never without its challenges. The same rivers that provided life could turn into instruments of destruction. Periodic droughts or sudden floods could wipe out entire communities. Furthermore, competition between city-states was fierce. Wars were frequent as neighboring cities fought for control of land, water access, and trade routes. Each city had its own king, often waging battles to expand influence or defend against encroachment. Unlike later empires that might unify vast territories under a single rule, Sumer remained a collection of independent city-states, loosely connected by culture and language but perpetually in conflict. As the centuries passed, the Sumerians' influence began to spread. Their inventions and ideas traveled beyond Mesopotamia, seeding neighboring cultures. Their writing system influenced the development of alphabets in the ancient world. Their architectural styles, religious concepts, and legal codes became templates for future civilizations. The Sumerians, though long vanished, left behind echoes of their brilliance that shaped history in profound ways. This marked the first chapter of a civilization that, in its prime, was the most advanced society on Earth. It was a place where agriculture, religion, law, and writing converged into a grand experiment of human ingenuity. But as with all things, change was inevitable, and the Sumerians would face trials that would challenge their very existence. As the Sumerian city-states flourished, their influence began to ripple farther than they could have imagined. The fertile land, a result of their careful irrigation, supported a growing population. With more people came specialization. Not everyone needed to work the fields anymore. Artisans emerged, crafting pottery, weaving textiles, forging metal tools, and creating exquisite jewelry. These craftsmen were no longer simply laborers, but skilled professionals, each contributing to the growing complexity of Sumerian society. This division of labor allowed for the expansion of cities and a deeper sense of community, as people began to rely on one another not just for survival, but for comfort, art, and luxury. One of the most remarkable aspects of Sumerian life was their religious devotion. Every city-state had its own patron deity, believed to protect and sustain its people. The temple, or ziggurat, was not just a place of worship, but the economic and administrative heart of the city. These massive stepped structures towered above everything else, constructed from sun-dried mud bricks. At their summit, a shrine housed the deity's statue, and it was believed that through ritual, the priesthood could communicate directly with the gods. Offerings of food, incense, and crafted goods were given regularly to maintain divine favor. The priests wielded enormous power, not merely as religious leaders, but as administrators of vast landholdings and the primary keepers of written records. The role of the king, or lugal, was a curious fusion of political and divine authority. Unlike later monarchs who often claimed divine bloodlines, early Sumerian rulers were seen as stewards of the god's will. Their primary role was to maintain order, organize the labor needed for public works like canals and temples, and lead in times of war. The king was both a servant and a representative of the gods, embodying their power while ensuring the well-being of the people. In times of conflict, Sumerian rulers would muster armies often composed of foot soldiers and chariots to defend their city or to seize new territory. These wars, though brutal, were not endless conquests, but pragmatic struggles for resources and survival. One of the most significant inventions of the Sumerians was their advanced system of mathematics. They developed a base 60 numeral system, likely chosen because 60 is highly divisible, making calculations easier for dividing time, land, or trade goods. This system led directly to our modern 60-minute hour and 360-degree circle. Mathematics wasn't an abstract science for the Sumerians. It was a practical tool, used to measure land for taxation, calculate interest on loans, and schedule the planting of crops according to the lunar calendar. The Sumerians' understanding of geometry and arithmetic became the backbone of their engineering achievements, allowing them to design irrigation systems that controlled the unpredictable floods of the Tigris and Euphrates. Among their many achievements, the Sumerians were the first to codify the passage of time in a structured way. The concept of dividing the day into hours, minutes, and seconds, which we take for granted today, was one of their most profound legacies. Their careful observations of the stars and planets were not purely for mystical purposes. They were meticulous records designed to predict seasonal changes and guide agricultural cycles. Lunar calendars, based on the phases of the moon, helped them track time and plan religious festivals or market activities. These calendars, though imperfect by modern standards, reflected a deep understanding of celestial rhythms and their connection to earthly life. Trade continued to expand as Sumerian merchants ventured beyond Mesopotamia. They traveled down the Persian Gulf in reed boats, laden with textiles, crafted goods, and surplus grain, seeking copper, tin, and precious stones. These voyages were perilous but essential, establishing the first long-distance commercial networks in human history. Merchants were respected members of society. Their ability to negotiate complex deals recorded on clay tablets using cuneiform script. Through trade, Sumerian culture mingled with that of distant peoples, spreading their technology, religious concepts, and writing system far beyond their borders. In return, they brought back exotic materials and ideas that would further enhance their cities. The development of writing revolutionized not just administration, but storytelling itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in cuneiform, stands as the oldest surviving piece of literature. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, and his journey in search of immortality. Though part myth, part historical account, the epic explores universal themes of friendship, mortality, and the human quest for meaning. In the clay tablets that preserve this ancient narrative, we glimpse the inner world of the Sumerians, their hopes, fears, and understanding of their place in the universe. The story reflects a society already deeply aware of the fragility of life, despite its technological and administrative achievements. However, the Sumerians faced internal challenges that threatened the stability of their civilization. As city-states grew richer and more powerful, inequality became more pronounced. Wealth and resources became concentrated in the hands of priests, kings, and merchants, while the majority of the population, farmers, laborers, and artisans, remained subject to heavy taxation and forced labor. Social hierarchy became rigid, and life was structured around class divisions. This growing disparity led to social tensions and occasional uprisings. Peasant revolts, though not often successful, were a recurring feature of Sumerian history, as the lower classes struggled to assert their rights against the ruling elite. Environmental challenges compounded these social tensions. The very success of irrigation led to unintended consequences. Over time, salt from the irrigation waters began to accumulate in the soil, diminishing its fertility. Crops yielded less, and land that once flourished turned barren. These ecological problems may have accelerated the decline of some city-states, forcing populations to abandon their homes or migrate elsewhere. The once mighty cities began to contract, their towering ziggurats standing as silent reminders of a past grandeur. Meanwhile, external pressures began to mount. Nomadic tribes from the surrounding desert regions, the Amorites and Gutians, increasingly raided Sumerian cities, taking advantage of their internal weaknesses. These incursions strained the military and the economy. In some cases, the rulers of neighboring regions began to assert dominance over Sumerian city-states. The idea of kingship began to shift from being a steward of divine will to a more aggressive, militaristic role. Warfare became more systematic, and alliances more strategic. The balance of power slowly shifted, setting the stage for the next phase of Mesopotamian history. Yet even as the Sumerians faced decline, their contributions to human civilization remained. Their written records captured not only trade transactions and laws, but astronomical observations, medical texts, and religious hymns. These clay tablets became the archives of human knowledge, preserved for thousands of years. The precision of their record-keeping allowed future generations to build upon their achievements. Mathematics, law, urban planning, and written language, all pillars of modern society, can trace their earliest foundations to this ancient people. Thus, the story of the Sumerians is not just one of rise and fall, but of resilience and legacy. It is a tale of humans learning to harness the power of nature, organize themselves into complex societies, and gaze at the stars to find order in a chaotic world. As we continue our journey deeper into the history of Sumer, we will explore the reigns of remarkable rulers, the flowering of art and culture, and the ultimate fate of this civilization whose whispers echo even today. The rise of powerful kings in Sumer marked a turning point in the civilization's development. Among the most legendary of these rulers was Gilgamesh, the semi-mythical king of Uruk, whose exploits were immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Though the epic presents a mix of legend and historical memory, it offers us a window into how the Sumerians viewed kingship, divinity, and the limits of human existence. Gilgamesh was depicted as a mighty and ambitious leader, part god and part man, wrestling with questions of mortality and legacy. His story, filled with heroic quests and tragic realizations, reflects a society already grappling with the transient nature of power and life itself. Following the legendary reign of figures like Gilgamesh, Sumer's city-states experienced periods of intense political intrigue and rivalry. Each city-state, led by its own king, sought to assert dominance, often leading to cycles of war and shifting alliances. The city of Lagash, for example, was known for its ambitious rulers who sought to expand their territory through military campaigns. Under King Enetum, Lagash asserted dominance over neighboring city-states, even going so far as to create one of the earliest known peace treaties. This treaty outlined the terms of war, reparations, and the treatment of prisoners, suggesting that the Sumerians had begun developing sophisticated diplomatic practices alongside their military strategies. In the midst of this competitive landscape, the role of religion remained central. The Sumerians viewed their kings as intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms, tasked with carrying out the will of the gods on earth. Temples and ziggurats continued to grow in size and complexity, serving not only as places of worship, but as massive economic hubs. These temple complexes controlled vast tracts of land, employing thousands of workers, from farmers and scribes to craftsmen and laborers. The temple economy was meticulously organized, with detailed records of crops harvested, livestock counted, and workers' contributions documented in cuneiform. This period also saw the remarkable development of Sumerian art and culture. The Sumerians expressed themselves through intricate pottery, finely carved statues, and detailed reliefs depicting scenes of daily life, religious rituals, and mythological events. One of the most iconic artifacts from this era is the Standard of a small wooden box adorned with elaborate inlays of shell, lapis lazuli, and red limestone, illustrating scenes of war and peace. These artifacts not only served decorative or ceremonial purposes, but also acted as visual records, offering insight into the values, beliefs, and daily activities of the Sumerian people. Music and poetry were highly valued, with lyres, drums, and flutes accompanying religious ceremonies and royal banquets. The Sumerians believed that music was a divine gift, capable of bridging the human and the supernatural. Poets and musicians often recited epic tales, hymns, and lamentations, passing down stories from one generation to the next. These performances were more than entertainment. They were acts of remembrance, ensuring that the deeds of gods and men would never be forgotten. As the city-states expanded and their administrative machinery became more complex, so too did their understanding of law and governance. The Code of Ur-Nammu, one of the earliest known law codes, emerged around this time. This legal framework predates the more famous Code of Hammurabi by centuries and established penalties for theft, assault, and other crimes. What makes the Sumerian Code remarkable is its attempt to formalize justice in written form rather than relying solely on customary practices. It established not only punishments but principles of fairness, reinforcing the idea that justice was a foundational element of social order. The laws were intended to protect the weak, ensure fair trade, and maintain social harmony, reflecting a society deeply aware of the delicate balance required to sustain itself. Despite these advancements, the Sumerians faced continuous challenges. One of the most persistent problems was the salinization of agricultural land. Over decades of irrigation without proper drainage, salt accumulated in the soil, reducing its fertility. This slow but relentless process undermined the economic foundation of many city-states. Farmers found their yields diminishing, and the once thriving granaries began to empty. The Sumerians' ability to adapt was tested as they struggled to maintain agricultural productivity in the face of ecological decline. Meanwhile, political instability intensified. Rivalries between city-states turned into prolonged conflicts, often resulting in sieges, destruction of farmland, and population displacement. The city of Umma and Lagash, for example, were embroiled in a bitter territorial dispute that lasted for decades, documented extensively on clay tablets. These records, painstakingly inscribed in cuneiform, describe battles, diplomatic exchanges, and the consequences of war, allowing us to glimpse the human cost of such conflicts. At the same time, external pressures from nomadic groups beyond the Fertile Crescent began to grow stronger. The Gutians, a group from the Zagros Mountains, saw opportunity in the weakening of Sumerian city-states. Over time, they invaded, capturing cities and disrupting the established order. The Gutian period is often depicted as a dark age in Sumerian history, marked by economic decline, disintegration of central authority, and the collapse of cultural institutions. Temples fell into disrepair, writing systems became neglected, and large-scale irrigation projects were abandoned, causing further ecological strain. Yet even during these dark times, the Sumerian spirit endured. Local leaders, scholars, and priests continued to document history, preserving their knowledge and cultural identity in the hope of revival. Despite the destruction, the written word remained. Clay tablets accumulated in the ruins of former temples, silent witnesses to a time of great achievement and profound struggle. Out of this period of decline, new powers began to emerge. The Akkadians, Semitic-speaking peoples from the north, started to assert dominance over the region. Under the leadership of Sargon of Akkad, one of history's first empire builders, the Akkadian Empire conquered the Sumerian city-states around 2334 BCE. Sargon's rise marked a significant shift from fragmented city-states to a more centralized imperial structure. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, uniting the diverse peoples of Mesopotamia under a single political framework. Sargon's administration was remarkable for its use of existing Sumerian bureaucratic practices, especially the cuneiform writing system. He adopted the Sumerian script and governance methods, recognizing their efficiency in managing vast territories. Though Akkadian became the spoken language, Sumerian remained the language of religion, law, and scholarship for centuries to come. This coexistence of languages reflects a profound cultural continuity, even as political control shifted. Sargon's reign was not without opposition. The conquered city-states, proud of their independence, frequently rebelled, and Sargon was forced to launch multiple military campaigns to maintain control. His rule established the precedent of centralized authority, supported by a professional bureaucracy and a standing army, concepts that would become staples of later empires. But the Akkadian Empire itself was not destined to last forever. By around 2154 BCE, internal strife, economic troubles, and external invasions weakened it considerably. The Gutians, seizing the opportunity, swept back into Mesopotamia, toppling Akkadian dominance, and plunging the region once again into fragmentation and decline. Yet, amidst the political upheaval, the cultural and technological legacy of the Sumerians persisted. Their system of writing, laws, urban planning, and religious practices continued to influence emerging powers in the region. Even as the great ziggurats crumbled and cities fell silent, the knowledge of the Sumerians remained engraved in clay, whispering their story across millennia. Thus, the stage was set for the next chapter in Mesopotamian history, as new civilizations would rise from the ashes of the Sumerians, carrying forward the seeds of their remarkable innovations. The Sumerian legacy was not one of conquest or dominance, but of the quiet, persistent accumulation of human knowledge, driven by a desire to understand the world, impose order upon chaos, and leave a mark that would endure through time. Even though the Akkadian Empire eventually fell, it served as a crucial bridge between the ancient Sumerian city-states and the future of Mesopotamian civilization. In the centuries that followed, the region saw the gradual resurgence of Sumerian culture, this time intertwined more closely with the new powers rising around them. One of the most significant periods after the Gutian interregnum was the era of the third dynasty of Ur, often referred to as Ur-3, beginning around 2112 BCE under the rule of Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu, the founder of this dynasty, was a visionary leader who sought to restore the grandeur of Sumer. His reign is particularly remembered for the codification of one of the earliest known law codes, often called the Code of Ur-Nammu. Unlike earlier legal arrangements that were perhaps more ad hoc, Ur-Nammu's code was systematic and written in a form accessible to future generations. This was a deliberate effort to formalize justice and standardize governance. The laws covered a wide range of matters: theft, marriage, property rights, and even moral offenses. Importantly, the code provided specific penalties for different crimes, showing a level of legal sophistication and social organization that was remarkable for its time. It reflected a society striving for order, one where the king was seen as the ultimate guarantor of justice, ensuring that society remained in balance. Under Ur-Nammu's rule, the city of Ur regained its former prominence. The ziggurat of Ur, a monumental structure dedicated to the moon god Nanna, became the most impressive of its kind, symbolizing both religious devotion and political power. The ziggurat was not merely a place of worship, but a center of economic activity. Vast granaries, workshops, and administrative offices surrounded it. Tens of thousands of workers, scribes, and priests operated in harmony to maintain the city's infrastructure, manage its economy, and perform the elaborate religious rites that connected the people to their gods. Economically, the Ur-3 period was marked by centralized administration and meticulous record-keeping. Thousands of clay tablets have been discovered from this era, many of them detailed accounts of agricultural production, labor assignments, and tax records. These tablets reveal an astonishing level of organization. Farmers were assigned plots of land by the state, and their produce was carefully tracked and redistributed to maintain stability. The state controlled large-scale irrigation systems, ensuring that even during times of low rainfall, crops could be sustained. Laborers were often conscripted for public works projects, including the repair of canals and the construction of temples, highlighting the inextricable link between the religious and economic life of the city. Art and culture continued to thrive during the Ur-3 period. The Sumerians had developed a distinct artistic style, characterized by detailed and realistic depictions of human figures, animals, and daily life. Statues of worshippers, often carved from alabaster, were placed in temples as eternal representations of devotion, their wide eyes gazing upward in perpetual prayer. Cylinder seals, small cylindrical objects engraved with intricate scenes, served both as a form of personal identification and as works of art. Each seal told a story, sometimes mythological, sometimes mundane, capturing the imagination of the Sumerians and providing a tangible connection to their identity. Religion remained a vital part of Sumerian life, but it evolved in complexity. The gods were no longer seen as mere forces of nature, but as individual beings with distinct personalities and domains. Enlil, once a somewhat abstract force of wind and air, became a god of kingship and order. Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, emerged as one of the most powerful deities, embodying both nurturing and destructive aspects of life. These gods were deeply anthropomorphic, with their own desires, conflicts, and rivalries, mirroring human behavior in many ways. Myths, such as the descent of Inanna, told of her journey to the underworld and return, symbolizing cycles of death and rebirth, and reflecting the Sumerians' profound awareness of life's transient nature. But no civilization grows indefinitely without facing its share of challenges. The very structure of the Ur-3 state, so heavily centralized and reliant on bureaucratic precision, became its own vulnerability. As time went on, corruption among officials began to rise. The burden of taxes and labor on the common people grew heavier, fostering resentment and discontent. External threats, too, loomed ever larger. The Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people from the west, began encroaching into Mesopotamian lands. Unlike the nomadic Gutians who struck unpredictably, the Amorites were gradually integrating into the region, setting up their own settlements and challenging Sumerian control. The final blow to Ur III came around 2000 BCE, when a coalition of Amorite tribes, led by an ambitious leader, sacked the city of Ur. The once mighty city, whose ziggurat had reached toward the heavens, fell into ruin. The fall of Ur marked not just the end of a dynasty, but the collapse of the last great Sumerian political power. It seemed for a time that the Sumerian way of life would vanish into the sands of history. Yet even as political power faded, the cultural achievements of the Sumerians lived on. Their writing system, the cuneiform script, continued to be used by successor cultures for centuries. The art, architecture, legal codes, and religious ideas of Sumer did not disappear, but instead became absorbed and adapted by the Babylonians, Assyrians, and later empires. Temples once dedicated to Sumerian gods were rededicated to newer deities. Their rituals and myths reshaped to fit evolving theological frameworks, but retaining unmistakable traces of their Sumerian origins. The Amorite period, particularly under the rule of Hammurabi of Babylon, saw the continuation of many Sumerian practices, especially in law and administration. The famous Code of Hammurabi, though more elaborate and preserved in stone, reflected the same impulse that had driven Ur-Nammu, the desire to impose order through codified laws. Sumerian scribes continued to produce scholarly works, recording medical knowledge, astronomical observations, and literary compositions. Even in the libraries of Babylon, Sumerian tablets were collected, copied, and studied, ensuring that their knowledge was neither lost nor forgotten. While political control shifted and empires rose and fell, the spirit of the Sumerians endured in the intellectual DNA of Mesopotamia. Their systematic approach to governance, trade, writing, and religious life set a precedent for future civilizations. Mesopotamia remained a region of remarkable complexity, where agriculture, commerce, theology, and early science coexisted and evolved in tandem. The echoes of Sumer also reached beyond Mesopotamia. Traders and travelers carried their inventions and ideas westward toward the Levant and Egypt, and eastward toward Persia and the Indus Valley. The influence of Sumerian cuneiform was especially profound, serving as the blueprint for the development of later writing systems. Similarly, their mathematical concepts, like the sexagesimal system, survived and evolved, eventually becoming the foundation for our contemporary measurements of time and geometry. Despite the passage of millennia, archaeological excavations have revealed astonishingly well-preserved records of the Sumerians' daily lives. Thousands of clay tablets buried beneath layers of earth continue to speak of their achievements, struggles, and aspirations. These artifacts tell stories not only of kings and wars, but of farmers tracking the phases of the moon, priests recording omens, merchants negotiating trade, and scribes dedicating themselves to the labor of documentation. The Sumerians did not build their legacy on conquest or empire alone. They built it on an understanding that human civilization is a delicate balance between knowledge, environment, and society. Their inventions, writing, legal codes, mathematics, architecture, were not ends in themselves, but tools for mastering this balance. They faced nature's unpredictability, societal tensions, and political ambition with a persistent desire to impose order, create beauty, and seek meaning in the stars above. As the Sumerian cities gradually faded into the background of history, their spirit lived on in subtle but profound ways. The transition from Sumerian independence to being part of larger Mesopotamian empires was not abrupt. It was a slow melding of cultures, traditions, and knowledge. The great ziggurats of Ur, Uruk, and Nippur, once the shining centers of Sumerian religious and political life, remained standing, though their purpose shifted over time. New rulers would ascend the steps, performing ceremonies to honor both old and new gods, and the rituals of the Sumerians became intertwined with the beliefs of the Babylonians and Assyrians. The Babylonians in particular were heirs to the Sumerian legacy. Babylon, under the rule of Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, became a beacon of centralized power and legal innovation. Hammurabi's famous law code did not emerge from a vacuum. It was deeply influenced by the earlier Sumerian codes, especially that of Ur-Nammu. The principles of justice, property rights, and social order established by the Sumerians were adapted, expanded, and enforced on a grander scale. Hammurabi's stele, famously inscribed with the 282 laws, was a monumental effort to present law as a divine gift and a practical tool for society's well-being. Yet beneath the grandeur of Hammurabi's reign lay the foundational work of generations of Sumerian scribes who had first understood that writing was the key to order. Trade continued to flourish in this period, as the Sumerians' early networks expanded and evolved into more sophisticated economic systems. Merchants and caravans traveled farther than ever before, linking distant regions in a web of exchange. The Sumerian methods of accounting, already advanced in their time, now found expression in ledgers and complex contracts recorded meticulously on clay tablets. The practice of documenting loans, debts, and business transactions became standardized, allowing for an unprecedented level of economic predictability. The Sumerian influence also extended deeply into religious life. Many of their gods remained worshipped, though often under different names or slightly altered forms. Inanna, the powerful goddess of love, war, and fertility, became Ishtar in Babylonian mythology. Her passionate, multifaceted nature continued to captivate worshippers, and her festivals were celebrated with fervor. Rituals originally developed by Sumerian priests remained central to Mesopotamian religious practices. The concept of maintaining cosmic order, or me, attributed to the god's will, was a direct inheritance from Sumerian theology. Yet, as the centuries rolled on, the Sumerian language itself began to fade from everyday use. By around 2000 BCE, Sumerian was gradually replaced by Akkadian as the dominant spoken and written language in the region. Despite this shift, Sumerian remained the language of religion, scholarly texts, and ceremonial inscriptions for hundreds of years thereafter. It became a kind of sacred tongue, much like Latin in medieval Europe, studied and preserved by scribes who saw themselves as the guardians of an ancient tradition. The meticulous copying of Sumerian texts in scribal schools ensured that their knowledge was passed down, even as the language became increasingly detached from daily conversation. The scribal schools themselves became institutions of learning, where students learned not only to write cuneiform, but to memorize and interpret ancient texts. These schools were often associated with temples, making them both religious and educational centers. Young scribes practiced by copying lists of signs, astronomical records, legal cases, and religious hymns. Their training was rigorous and lifelong, reflecting the high regard in which literacy was held. To be a scribe was not just to hold a job, it was to participate in a sacred duty of preserving knowledge, maintaining the legacy of the past, and ensuring the stability of society. The city of Nippur, once a major religious center of Sumer, became a symbolic hub during this time. Even as political power shifted to Babylon or Assyria, Nippur's temple remained a site of immense spiritual significance. It was believed to be the dwelling place of Enlil, the god who held authority over the cosmos. The Sumerian ideal of kingship, as a steward of the gods, responsible for justice and order, continued to influence the conception of rulership across Mesopotamia. Every new king, regardless of ethnic or linguistic background, had to legitimize their reign by associating themselves with the ancient gods of Sumer. In terms of architecture, the Sumerian influence persisted long after their political decline. The ziggurat, a uniquely Mesopotamian creation, remained a central architectural feature for centuries. These enormous stepped structures were not built merely for religious display. They represented the enduring aspiration of humankind to bridge earth and heaven. Each layer of the ziggurat symbolized a step closer to the divine, a tangible expression of the Sumerians' understanding of their place in the cosmos. The grandest of these, the ziggurat of Ur, stood as a testament to their engineering skill and spiritual devotion, even as its political power waned. Meanwhile, science and scholarship, born in the scribal schools of Sumer, continued to advance. The Sumerians' early astronomical observations laid the groundwork for future studies of the heavens. By carefully tracking the movements of celestial bodies, they began to develop rudimentary calendars, able to predict eclipses and seasonal changes with surprising accuracy. These observations were not purely scientific. They were deeply religious, woven into the belief that the movements of the stars reflected the will of the gods. Nonetheless, they represented an early attempt to understand the universe in systematic terms. Medicine, too, was an area where Sumerian knowledge endured. Medical texts from the period describe various treatments, from herbal remedies to surgical procedures. These texts reveal a surprisingly advanced understanding of the human body for their time, though heavily intertwined with magical incantations and spiritual healing. Illness was seen not merely as a physical ailment, but as a manifestation of divine displeasure or evil spirits. Priests, physicians performed rituals, offered prayers, and administered remedies, all while recording symptoms and treatments on clay tablets for future reference. As new empires rose, Babylon, Assyria, and later Persia, the story of the Sumerians began to fade from the collective memory of the people living in Mesopotamia. Yet in every decree written in cuneiform, in every temple rebuilt, in every law code enacted, and in every myth retold, the echoes of the Sumerians remained. Their story was not one of grand conquests or spectacular monuments alone, but of quiet perseverance, of a people who, faced with the capriciousness of nature and the ambitions of rivals, built the first structures of civilization that others would build upon. By the time the Babylonians reached their peak under King Nebuchadnezzar, the Sumerians were already a distant memory, their language unreadable to most, their cities reduced to ruins. Yet scholars and priests still copied Sumerian texts, preserving the legacy with a reverence that no political change could erase. Their work ensured that thousands of years later, modern archaeology would unearth tablets, ziggurats, and artifacts that speak of a civilization whose impact resonates even today. The Sumerian story was, in many ways, a story of human ambition against the backdrop of nature's unpredictable might. It was a civilization that learned to channel the wild waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, that first shaped language into a tool for governance and art, and that laid the foundation for laws, religion, and trade as we know them. It was not the might of empires that defined their greatness, but the steady accumulation of knowledge, innovation, and culture that shaped the human experience. Even as the Sumerians gradually faded into history as a distinct political entity, their cultural and intellectual legacy began to spread far beyond Mesopotamia. This transmission of knowledge occurred not through conquest alone, but through the quiet work of scribes, traders, and travelers who carried Sumerian ideas across continents. The cuneiform writing system remained in use long after Sumerian ceased to be a spoken language, preserved as a sacred script that connected generations across time. In this way, the Sumerians became the unseen architects of civilization, their innovations woven into the very fabric of human progress. One of the most remarkable continuities was in the realm of astronomy. The Sumerians were among the first to systematically observe the night sky, recording the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars on clay tablets. These observations were not merely religious or mythological, they had practical applications. The Sumerians' ability to predict lunar cycles and seasonal changes allowed for the creation of calendars that regulated agriculture, trade, and religious festivals. They devised the sexagesimal base 60 system, which allowed them to divide the day into 24 hours, each hour into 60 minutes, and each minute into 60 seconds, a system still used around the world today. The knowledge of astronomy was deeply linked to their religious worldview. They believed that the movements of celestial bodies were the manifestations of divine will, signals from the gods about the fate of kings and nations. As such, astronomy and astrology became almost inseparable disciplines. Sumerian priests and astronomer priests known as Baru would carefully interpret these signs, providing advice to rulers on when to go to war, when to plant crops, or when to hold religious ceremonies. These observations were recorded with incredible precision, often in the form of star charts and detailed omens, all meticulously inscribed in cuneiform script. Trade remained another powerful channel through which Sumerian influence continued to spread. Long before the idea of globalization, the Sumerians had established vast commercial networks that extended across the ancient Near East. Their merchants navigated the rivers and deserts, reaching distant regions such as Anatolia, the Levant, and even the Indus Valley. They traded textiles, grain, crafted goods, and metalwork in exchange for copper, tin, lapis lazuli, and other precious resources not locally available in Mesopotamia. The trade routes were complex, involving multiple intermediaries, contracts, and agreements that required sophisticated legal and accounting practices, the legacy of the Sumerians' early development of writing. These trade networks were not one-way channels, but vibrant exchanges of goods and ideas. The Sumerian system of weights and measures, their methods of bookkeeping, and even their architectural concepts found their way into neighboring cultures. The practice of temple building, with its monumental stepped ziggurats, inspired architectural styles in later civilizations, including the Babylonians and Assyrians. Temples remained the central hubs of political, religious, and economic life, following the Sumerian model of integrating administration and worship. Meanwhile, the epic literary tradition pioneered by the Sumerians continued to thrive. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally composed in Sumerian, was translated and adapted by Akkadian and Babylonian scribes. Its themes of friendship, mortality, the quest for immortality, and the acceptance of human limits resonated deeply with later generations. Copies of the epic, written on clay tablets, were preserved in libraries such as that of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, where scribes dedicated their lives to compiling vast collections of knowledge from across the ancient world. Beyond Gilgamesh, Sumerian myths continued to shape the religious and literary imagination of the region. Stories about the creation of the world, the flood sent by the gods to cleanse humanity, and the pantheon of deities were retold, reinterpreted, and incorporated into the mythologies of successive empires. These narratives were not static. They evolved, reflecting new cultural influences and historical contexts, but their core elements remained distinctly Sumerian in origin. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Sumerian legacy was their approach to medicine. Medical texts from the time show a complex understanding of illness and treatment. While diseases were often interpreted as the result of divine punishment or malevolent spirits, Sumerian physicians nonetheless employed a range of treatments that included herbal remedies, surgeries, and therapeutic rituals. They documented symptoms, treatments, and prognoses in systematic medical compendiums. For example, there are records of treatments for wounds, eye diseases, and gastrointestinal complaints. The combination of empirical observation with spiritual healing marked an early attempt at what we now recognize as holistic medicine. Even as the centuries passed, the Sumerians' methods of irrigation and land management left an indelible mark on agriculture. Their early innovations in canal building and water control became the standard in Mesopotamia, influencing agricultural practices for millennia. The precise management of water, an essential and scarce resource in the region, allowed for the stable growth of urban centers long before industrial technology. Without this mastery of water, the densely populated cities of Mesopotamia, with their elaborate temple complexes and sprawling markets, would not have been possible. The Sumerian approach to governance and society also set important precedents. The idea of a codified law system was revolutionary. Previously, law was largely based on tradition, enforced arbitrarily by local chieftains or religious leaders. By putting laws into writing, the Sumerians ensured consistency and fairness, making the law transparent and accessible, at least to those who could read. This principle of transparency and order in governance would later inspire legal systems throughout the ancient world and into modern times. But as much as the Sumerians sought stability and continuity, their civilization was inevitably subject to the tides of change. The political power that once centered in Ur, Uruk, and Nippur began to dissolve entirely. The rise of Babylon as the dominant power in Mesopotamia shifted the focus of the region, yet Babylonian kings continued to pay homage to the ancient Sumerian legacy. Rituals honoring Sumerian deities were incorporated into state ceremonies. Royal inscriptions often referenced the ancient past, legitimizing rule by tracing connections to Sumer's divine heritage. The memory of Sumer was preserved in scholarly tradition, even as Sumerian as a language became extinct around 2000 BCE. It remained a subject of study for hundreds of years. By the time of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, Sumerian was studied almost like a classical language, taught in scribal schools as part of the education of the elite. This allowed for the continuation of Sumerian myths, hymns, and scientific texts. Generations of scholars meticulously copied texts from old clay tablets, preserving the ancient wisdom that would otherwise have been lost to time. Archaeological discoveries in the modern era have provided profound insights into the Sumerian way of life. Excavations of ancient city ruins have revealed clay tablets covered in cuneiform writing, statues, jewelry, tools, and the remains of ziggurats that once scraped the sky. These findings unveiled a civilization of remarkable complexity, one that combined the practical with the spiritual, the scientific with the poetic, and the political with the religious. Each tablet recovered is a piece of a puzzle, offering a snapshot of a world long vanished but never forgotten. The story of Sumer is, in the end, the story of human ambition. It is the story of people who first learned to tame the unpredictable forces of nature, who first turned thought into written words, and who first sought to organize society through law, religion, and commerce. They were the pioneers who laid the foundation upon which the great civilizations of Babylon, Assyria, Persia, and beyond were built. Though their empire crumbled, their legacy remained alive, a silent, enduring testament to the dawn of civilization itself. As the Sumerian legacy became intertwined with emerging powers, a new chapter in Mesopotamian history unfolded, a chapter of vast empires, territorial ambitions, and shifting cultural landscapes. The fall of Sumerian political dominance did not signify the end of its influence. Rather, it was the beginning of a profound integration of Sumerian achievements into the very DNA of Mesopotamian civilization, setting the stage for the rise of Babylon and the later Assyrian Empire. The Amorites, once seen as peripheral nomads, established themselves as the new ruling class in southern Mesopotamia. The city of Babylon, initially a minor town, rose to prominence during this period, particularly under the reign of Hammurabi, who ruled from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. Hammurabi was not just a conqueror, he was a visionary statesman who sought to unify Mesopotamia under a single, centralized authority. His most famous contribution, the Code of Hammurabi, remains one of the earliest and most comprehensive sets of laws in human history. Unlike the earlier Sumerian codes, which were more rudimentary and fragmented, the Code of Hammurabi was carefully organized and publicly displayed on a massive stone stele. The preamble of the code declared that Hammurabi was chosen by the gods to bring justice and order to the land. Every section of the code dealt with specific areas of life: marriage, trade, labor, property, and even personal injury, setting detailed penalties for infractions. The famous principle of an eye for an eye, lex talionis, encapsulated the era's sense of balanced retribution and fairness, though the punishments varied depending on social status. Nobles and commoners were not always treated equally under the law, reflecting the rigid class structures of the time. Hammurabi's reign marked a period of relative stability and prosperity, where infrastructure projects flourished alongside legal reform. Canals and irrigation networks were repaired and expanded, reinforcing the legacy of the Sumerians' mastery over the land. These improvements allowed Babylon to become a major economic hub, a center of trade connecting the Persian Gulf with the Mediterranean and the Levant. Merchants from Babylon dealt in textiles, grain, pottery, and luxury goods, while Sumerian accounting techniques ensured that commerce was meticulously recorded. Culturally, the Sumerian influence remained omnipresent. The Babylonian pantheon continued to incorporate Sumerian deities. Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, was often depicted as a new, more centralized version of older Sumerian gods like Enlil. Myths were retold and reinterpreted, blending Sumerian narratives with Babylonian innovations. For example, the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, which described the rise of Marduk as the king of gods, had clear parallels with earlier Sumerian cosmogonies. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh, a distinctly Sumerian literary masterpiece, was preserved in Babylonian tablets, ensuring that the heroic tales of Gilgamesh and Enkidu continued to inspire and influence for generations. While Babylon became a powerful empire, another great force was rising in the north: Assyria. Initially a modest city-state, Assyria gradually expanded its power, establishing a formidable military presence. The Assyrians adopted and adapted Sumerian practices, including cuneiform writing and temple-centered administration. Assyrian kings viewed themselves not merely as rulers, but as warriors chosen by the gods to impose order. Their approach to governance was more militaristic and expansionist than that of the Sumerians or Babylonians, but the administrative tools they used were deeply rooted in the systems the Sumerians had developed centuries earlier. Assyria's military conquest extended across Mesopotamia and beyond, establishing one of the first true empires in history. This empire building was facilitated by the complex bureaucratic apparatus inherited from the Sumerians. Provincial governors were appointed, tax systems were meticulously enforced, and large-scale projects, roads, aqueducts, palaces, were commissioned, all relying on cuneiform records and scribal work. Meanwhile, religious practices continued to evolve. The Sumerian concept of me, referring to the divine laws and powers governing the universe, persisted as a central theological principle. Every king, priest, and citizen was bound by these cosmic decrees, which justified both the ruler's authority and the temple's prominence. The ziggurat remained a symbol of this relationship between heaven and earth. The great temples were often rebuilt and expanded by successive rulers, maintaining the architectural heritage of the Sumerians while adapting to the changing religious landscape. Despite the political and military dominance of Babylon and Assyria, Sumerian contributions to education and knowledge remained alive. Scribes continued to copy, study, and debate ancient Sumerian texts. The content of these texts ranged from practical matters like mathematical tables and farming schedules to deep theological discussions. The intellectual tradition of the Sumerians had embedded itself in the very idea of learning and scholarship. One of the most remarkable examples of this intellectual inheritance was the use of mathematical tables. The Sumerians had been among the first to develop arithmetic methods based on their sexagesimal system, which allowed for complex calculations related to astronomy, land measurement, and commerce. These tables were copied and used for centuries by subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations. The ability to predict celestial events, plan agricultural cycles, and administer economic transactions all depended on the knowledge first systematized by Sumerian scholars. Medicine, too, continued to be a field of Sumerian legacy. The comprehensive medical compendiums that combined empirical treatments with spiritual rituals were used by Babylonian and Assyrian physicians alike. Diseases were still often viewed as divine punishment, but the treatments had become more systematic. Records included diagnoses, prognoses, prescriptions, and even early surgical techniques. This careful documentation of medical knowledge, passed down through generations of scribes, demonstrates how the Sumerians' empirical approach to understanding the body laid the foundation for ancient medicine. Trade, science, law, religion, architecture, and literature each bore the indelible mark of the Sumerians. Their methods of recording transactions, their approach to governance through written law, and their belief in the importance of education created a framework upon which other great civilizations were built. Even the way future empires legitimized their power by connecting themselves to the gods and ancient tradition was influenced by Sumerian practice. By the time the Neo-Babylonian Empire flourished in the 7th century BCE, and later the Persian Empire expanded across Mesopotamia, Sumer was already ancient history. Yet these later rulers continued to study and preserve Sumerian texts. They understood that their greatness was built upon the intellectual and cultural foundations laid by the Sumerians. The tablets preserved in libraries, the rituals performed in temples, the laws that structured society, all were echoes of a civilization that once boldly stepped beyond the unknown and charted the first course of human history. Even today, modern scholars and archaeologists continue to uncover the fragments of Sumer's story. Every clay tablet unearthed, every inscription translated, every artifact restored serves as a testament to a people who, millennia ago, dared to turn their world into a written, organized, and ever-expanding human civilization. The Sumerians were not the rulers of an empire that spanned continents or the builders of the largest monuments. Instead, their greatness lies in their ideas, the power to record, to govern, to observe, and to imagine, a power that has subtly shaped the world we live in. As the centuries passed and new powers came and went, the distinct identity of the Sumerian civilization gradually disappeared from the living world. What remained, however, was not merely a collection of ancient ruins or forgotten names, but a profound intellectual and cultural inheritance that continued to influence civilizations long after the last Sumerian city had been abandoned. By the first millennium BCE, the lands that once formed the heart of Sumer had become fully absorbed into larger empires. First Babylon, then Assyria, and eventually Persia under Cyrus the Great. These empires respected the ancient traditions of the land, not out of nostalgia, but because they understood the power and legitimacy those traditions provided. The temples continued to function as centers of worship and administration. The rituals and myths of the Sumerian gods were still recited and performed, though now interwoven with new deities, practices, and imperial ideologies. One of the most profound continuities was in the realm of written knowledge. Sumerian cuneiform, once the cutting-edge technology of communication and record-keeping, became a script studied for its antiquity and authority. Even as the spoken language faded, the ability to read and write Sumerian became a mark of prestige among scholars and priests. They diligently copied ancient texts, ensuring that the wisdom of their predecessors would not vanish. These scribes, often working in temple schools, preserved not just religious hymns and myths, but also mathematical tables, astronomical observations, medical prescriptions, and administrative documents. Archaeological discoveries in modern times reveal that thousands of these clay tablets, inscribed with Sumerian script, were carefully stored in libraries of the ancient world. The most famous of these was the Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. which preserved texts from multiple earlier civilizations, including a vast collection of Sumerian literature. In this way, the Sumerians became the intellectual forebears of the Near Eastern world, their contributions foundational to successive waves of cultural development. Even though the Sumerian language itself ceased to be spoken, its structure and the knowledge encoded in it continued to influence later languages. Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian scholars adopted many Sumerian logograms, symbols that represented whole words, as part of their own writing system. The process of combining logograms with phonetic elements, a key development in cuneiform writing, was pioneered by the Sumerians. This made writing more versatile and capable of expressing complex ideas, far beyond the basic accounting for which it was originally devised. Religious ideas originating in Sumer also left a lasting mark. The Sumerian conception of a pantheon of anthropomorphic gods, each responsible for specific aspects of nature and society, became the dominant model in Mesopotamia. The notion that rulers were divinely sanctioned, acting as intermediaries between gods and humans, persisted throughout the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. Even when polytheism gave way to emerging monotheistic tendencies in later cultures, the influence of Sumerian mythology was still evident in foundational texts, such as the Old Testament, which shares narratives like the Great Flood with ancient Mesopotamian myths. The Sumerians' systematic approach to time and mathematics survived far beyond their civilization's political end. Their sexagesimal system remains in use today in how we measure time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and in the division of a circle into 360 degrees. This mathematical legacy demonstrates their forward-thinking grasp of abstract concepts. The system was designed for ease of division, allowing for the calculation of fractions in ways that decimal systems would find more cumbersome. Even modern astronomers, without consciously realizing it, continue to operate within a framework first invented by Sumerian scholars. The agricultural practices they pioneered also left a lasting legacy. Their extensive use of irrigation techniques to control the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates became the standard method of farming in the region. Without their innovations in canal construction and water management, the later empires would have struggled to sustain the large populations of their urban centers. Sumerian techniques allowed for the cultivation of vast fields of barley, wheat, and other staples, which in turn supported trade and urban life. The idea of the irrigation state, where the government played an active role in maintaining agricultural infrastructure, was first articulated by Sumerian rulers and continued to shape Mesopotamian governance. Their contribution to the concept of law as a codified public institution was perhaps one of the most enduring. Prior to the Sumerians, law was often local, oral, and subject to arbitrary enforcement. The first written laws, such as the Code of Ur-Nammu, established the principle that society itself could be organized by clear, written regulations. This system allowed for the possibility of justice being impartial, consistent, and publicly accessible. Even the famous laws of Hammurabi were, at their core, built upon the Sumerians' early experiments in writing down rules. In this way, the Sumerians laid the first philosophical foundation of what would much later become the modern concept of the rule of law. The Sumerians' approach to urban life was another remarkable achievement. Their cities were not merely agglomerations of buildings, but carefully organized spaces where religious, political, and economic activities converged. Streets were laid out with consideration for trade and administration. The temple complex sat at the center, not just as a place of worship, but as the administrative heart of the city. The ziggurats symbolized this integration, rising above the cityscape as both a literal and figurative axis mundi, a connection between heaven and earth, man and God. Sumerian society was complex, marked by a rigid class structure. At the top were the kings and high priests who held both secular and spiritual authority. Below them were the scribes, artisans, farmers, and merchants, whose daily labors formed the backbone of the economy. Slaves, often prisoners of war or debtors, performed much of the manual labor but were also integrated into the economy and religious system in surprisingly structured ways. Despite the hierarchical nature of their society, the Sumerians also developed the idea that the king was a servant of the gods, not merely a ruler by hereditary right. This created a unique tension between divine authority and political power, which would be echoed in the political philosophies of later civilizations. Sumerian literature remained one of the most compelling reflections of their worldview. Stories of gods and mortals, of epic journeys and tragic flaws, revealed a deep preoccupation with human destiny, mortality, and the search for meaning. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as a testament to their literary genius. It is the world's oldest known epic poem and tells the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and his quest for immortality. Through his adventures, battling monsters, losing his closest friend, and ultimately coming to terms with his mortality, the Sumerians explored fundamental questions about life, death, and the human condition. These themes would continue to resonate across cultures for millennia, proving the universal nature of their insights. As the Iron Age dawned and new powers emerged, the Sumerians as a distinct people had largely vanished from political prominence. Their cities lay in ruins, their spoken language lost, and their direct line of rulers dissolved into history. Yet their influence remained, not as a faded relic of the past, but as a vibrant, living legacy embedded in every law, written word, agricultural practice, and architectural achievement that followed. Their story is not simply a chronicle of rise and fall, but of enduring contributions. They were the first to recognize that civilization depends not only on the conquest of nature, but also on the careful cultivation of knowledge, art, law, and faith. The wisdom they recorded in cuneiform tablets survives as a silent yet profound dialogue across time, testimony to their belief that human beings could shape their destiny through order, observation, and understanding. The tale of the Sumerians might have remained a distant mystery, lost to the sands of time, were it not for the remarkable work of archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries, who painstakingly unearthed their story. It is a fascinating chapter of rediscovery, a journey that began with scattered ruins in southern Iraq, slowly revealing the forgotten cradle of civilization. In the early 1800s, Western explorers and adventurers traveled to Mesopotamia, drawn by ancient texts, biblical references, and the allure of discovering ancient cities. At that time, much of Mesopotamia remained uncharted and shrouded in mystery. The people living there were mostly unaware of the grandeur that had once existed beneath their feet. It was a land of shifting sands, ancient mounds, and whispered legends. One of the earliest significant discoveries came in the 1840s, when European expeditions began excavating the ancient city of Nineveh, uncovering the ruins of the great Assyrian Empire. Though Nineveh itself was Assyrian, some of the tablets and inscriptions refer to even older times, times of the Sumerians. These early finds hinted at a civilization that predated known empires. It was in the later part of the 19th century that the real breakthroughs occurred. British archaeologist Sir Austen Henry Layard's excavations in the 1840s and 1850s uncovered vast libraries of cuneiform tablets at Nineveh, revealing the existence of a sophisticated writing system. Scholars, including Henry Rawlinson, dedicated themselves to deciphering these wedge-shaped symbols. The discovery that these cuneiform characters represented both sounds and ideas marked the beginning of understanding Sumerian writing. The real game-changer came with the excavations of sites such as Uruk, Ur, and Nippur. In the 1850s and later decades, teams led by archaeologists such as Leonard Woolley unearthed vast city ruins, elaborate ziggurats, palaces, and most notably, thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform script. These tablets contained administrative records, legal codes, astronomical observations, literary texts, and economic transactions. Each discovery painted a more vivid picture of a civilization that had been lost for over 2 millennia. One of the most remarkable finds was at the ancient city of Ur, where Woolley excavated the royal cemetery in the 1920s and 1930s. Among the many discoveries were richly adorned graves, including what became known as the Great Death Pit, filled with golden artifacts, jewelry, ceremonial objects, and the remains of people buried alongside their rulers. These findings spoke volumes about the social hierarchy, craftsmanship, and burial customs of the Sumerians. The decipherment of Sumerian itself posed a unique challenge. Unlike Akkadian, which was part of the Semitic language family and had some linguistic relatives, Sumerian was a linguistic isolate, unrelated to any known language family. It stood alone with no apparent linguistic relatives, making its decipherment an extraordinary feat of scholarly persistence. Over decades, linguists painstakingly compared Sumerian texts with Akkadian translations, slowly unlocking the grammar, vocabulary, and structure of the language. These breakthroughs had profound implications. Suddenly, the Sumerians were no longer just a legend or a footnote in history. They were the first known civilization in the historical record. The realization that they had been the first to develop writing, urban planning, legal codes, and advanced irrigation shattered prior conceptions about human progress. Historians began to see them as the true originators of what we now understand as civilization. The Sumerian tablets themselves revealed an astonishingly advanced society. Economic records detailed the daily transactions of grain, livestock, labor, and goods, sometimes down to the last barley grain or sheep. Contracts between merchants outlined trade agreements with precise terms, deadlines, and penalties. These weren't mere primitive scribbles. They were sophisticated tools for managing a complex economy. The religious texts found in temple archives uncovered a deeply spiritual worldview. Hymns praised deities like Inanna, Enlil, and Enki, describing the creation of humanity as a collaborative effort between gods and primordial forces. Rituals were elaborate and precise, showing that the Sumerians believed their actions could directly influence the cosmic balance. Temples were not just places of worship, but powerful centers of administration and learning, where priests served both as spiritual leaders and as scholars. One of the most surprising revelations was the extent of Sumerian literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, long known from later Babylonian copies, was found in its original Sumerian form, allowing scholars to trace the evolution of its narrative. The story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, two friends who embark on a profound journey exploring the meaning of life and death, became more than just a myth. It was recognized as a universal meditation on human ambition and mortality. The themes were remarkably modern in their existential depth, bridging the millennia to speak directly to contemporary human concerns. Even scientific knowledge preserved on tablets astounded scholars. Astronomical calculations, star charts, and lunar observations showed a systematic approach to understanding the heavens. Mathematical tables used for calculations of area, volume, and trade reflected a practical knowledge of geometry and arithmetic far ahead of its time. These were not isolated insights, but part of a comprehensive body of knowledge, meticulously organized and transmitted through generations of scribes. The discovery of Sumer's influence reshaped the narrative of world history. No longer was civilization seen as beginning with Egypt or later Greece. Sumer was understood as the true cradle of civilization. The word civilization itself, which many had loosely attributed to more recent societies, began to take on new meaning. The Sumerians were now seen as the first to form city-states, to conceptualize governance through written law, to create monumental architecture for both practical and religious purposes, and to organize complex trade networks that connected distant regions. Scholars also came to appreciate the profound resilience of Sumerian knowledge. Despite the disappearance of Sumerian cities and the extinction of their spoken language, their legacy was carried forward in cuneiform tablets, in the mythologies of later civilizations, in the way governments structured themselves, and even in the way time and geometry were measured today. The rediscovery of Sumer illuminated the deep roots of human ingenuity, showing that the desire to understand, record, and shape the world is as ancient as civilization itself. These discoveries transformed not just academic understanding but also popular imagination. Museums began to display Sumerian artifacts, from clay tablets to ceremonial jewelry, sparking fascination across the world. Documentaries, books, and lectures painted the Sumerians not merely as ancient rulers, but as visionaries, pioneers who first grasped that knowledge, when written and organized, could transcend generations. Yet there remained many mysteries. The exact reasons for the decline of Sumer are still debated. Was it environmental degradation, soil salinization from over-irrigation, constant invasions by neighboring peoples, or a combination of these factors? The truth likely lies in a complex interplay of economic strain, political instability, and ecological challenges. What remains undisputed is that the final chapters of Sumer's story were written not in the grand conquests of kings, but in the slow, almost imperceptible disappearance of their cities and culture into the broader tapestry of Mesopotamian history. Even today, the study of Sumer continues to evolve. Each new archaeological dig, every fresh interpretation of a previously undeciphered tablet, adds to our understanding of how the first civilization in human history lived, thought, and shaped the world. The Sumerians are no longer a distant enigma, but the foundational authors of human progress. To truly understand the Sumerians, one must look beyond their grand achievements in writing, law, and governance, and into the intimate rhythms of their daily life. Beneath the monumental ziggurats and royal courts, the ordinary Sumerian lived a life of profound simplicity, yet remarkable sophistication. It was a world shaped by the ebb and flow of the Tigris and Euphrates, by the cycle of seasons, by the tireless need to manage land, animals, and community. A typical Sumerian city was a bustling place, a complex organism where social, economic, religious, and political life intertwined seamlessly. The city of Uruk, often regarded as one of the world's first true urban centers, was home to tens of thousands of people. Narrow, winding streets connected mud brick houses, workshops, and market stalls, and at its heart stood the towering ziggurat dedicated to the city's patron deity, Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. The temple itself was not just a religious site. It functioned as an administrative center where offerings were received, economic transactions were recorded, and scribes worked tirelessly to document the lifeblood of the city. Most Sumerians were farmers, craftsmen, or laborers. The fertile plains of Mesopotamia, made productive through extensive irrigation systems, supported vast fields of barley, wheat, flax, and dates. Farmers would rise early, guiding ox-drawn plows through the heavy soil, managing irrigation ditches that crisscrossed the land. Barley was the staple crop, forming the basis of both food and beer, a central element of Sumerian culture. Beer, surprisingly nutritious and often safer to drink than water, was consumed daily by nearly everyone. Farmers traded surplus crops in local markets, exchanging grain for tools, pottery, textiles, and other necessities. Artisans held a respected position in Sumerian society. The creation of goods was both a practical and artistic pursuit. Metalworkers crafted intricate tools and weapons from copper and bronze. Potters shaped clay into vessels for storage, cooking, and ceremonial use, often adorned with geometric patterns or simple depictions of animals and gods. Textile production was another important craft, with wool and flax woven into garments. Sumerians wore simple but functional clothing, linen tunics for daily wear, more elaborate robes for priests and nobility. Jewelry, often made of lapis lazuli, carnelian, and gold, adorned both men and women, signaling wealth, status, or religious devotion. The structure of Sumerian society was hierarchical. At the top stood the lugal, often translated as king, though his power was never absolute in the way modern monarchs understood it. The lugal acted as a military leader, high priest, and administrative head. He maintained a close relationship with the city's patron deity, and his legitimacy was constantly reinforced through elaborate rituals and public works. Below him were the priests and priestesses, who oversaw the religious and economic functions of the temples. These temple officials not only conducted ceremonies but managed vast estates, organized labor, and kept meticulous records of offerings and transactions. The scribes, educated in the temple schools called edubas, were crucial intermediaries in Sumerian life. Learning to read and write cuneiform was no small feat. It required years of rigorous training. Scribes copied texts, recorded business deals, wrote letters, and maintained governmental and religious archives. Their role elevated them into an elite class of intellectuals who served the state and temple alike. Because writing was labor-intensive, only a small fraction of the population, mostly men, became scribes, and their knowledge granted them considerable social prestige. Family life in Sumer was structured, yet dynamic. Households were typically extended families living together in mud-brick homes with flat roofs and central courtyards. The family unit revolved around agricultural work and shared responsibilities. Men usually handled field work, herding, and external trade, while women took care of household management, child-rearing, and textile production. Women could also own property and engage in trade, though their rights were not entirely equal to those of men. Some women rose to prominent religious roles, becoming priestesses or influential figures in temple administration. Marriage was a formalized institution, often arranged by families to secure social or economic alliances. Legal contracts detailed the dowry, rights, and responsibilities of both husband and wife. Adultery was considered a serious offense, punishable by fines or other penalties, depending on the social status of those involved. Despite these formalities, the Sumerians wrote about love, longing, and companionship in their hymns and poetry, suggesting a deeply personal and emotional understanding of relationships. Religious life permeated every aspect of Sumerian existence. Each city worshipped a distinct pantheon of gods and goddesses, with rituals designed to maintain harmony between humans and the divine. Inanna, Enlil, Enki, Utu, and Ninhursag were among the most important deities, each responsible for various domains of the natural and spiritual world. Temples were not merely places of worship, they functioned as the economic heart of the city. Land, livestock, and goods were dedicated to the gods, and the temple managed vast estates worked by farmers and laborers. Every day began with offerings, grain, beer, incense, and sometimes animals, presented to the gods in elaborate ceremonies. These rituals were performed by priests, who recited hymns and prayers from meticulously copied texts. Festivals, often tied to the agricultural calendar, punctuated the year with grand celebrations. The Akitu festival, for example, celebrated the new year with processions, sacrifices, and recitations of myths that reaffirmed the cosmic order and the king's divine right to rule. Children were educated in the home or the temple school, learning basic numeracy, writing, and religious practices from an early age. Boys destined to become scribes or priests would begin their formal education around the age of 6 or 7, learning to copy and memorize cuneiform signs. Girls received instruction in household management, weaving, and perhaps some religious duties, though fewer became scribes. Music and entertainment also played an important role. Lyres, drums, and flutes were common instruments, used in religious ceremonies as well as private enjoyment. Songs ranged from hymns of praise to personal love ballads, often written in poetic form. Some of the oldest known pieces of music notation come from Sumerian tablets, giving us a rare glimpse into their auditory world. Sumerians were deeply aware of mortality. Their myths often revolved around themes of life, death, and the afterlife, reflecting a worldview in which humans were caught in a delicate balance between divine will and earthly hardship. The Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the most profound literary expression of this preoccupation, captures the existential angst of a civilization that understood its own fragility. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality, his sorrow at the death of Enkidu, and his ultimate acceptance of human limitation were not merely stories but reflections of the Sumerians' relationship with existence. Even in the face of hardship, floods, wars, economic uncertainty, the Sumerians persevered, building a civilization that was both pragmatic and imaginative. Their irrigation systems enabled agriculture in an unforgiving climate. Their legal codes provided order in a turbulent world. Their writing system preserved knowledge across generations. Every aspect of their culture, from mundane accounting tablets to grand epics, bore the hallmark of a people striving to understand their place in the universe. The legacy of their daily lives offers a unique window into the birth of civilization itself. They were not gods or legendary figures, but ordinary people, farmers, scribes, craftsmen, priests, and rulers, living in a society that first dared to document its triumphs, struggles, and dreams. Their story is not just a chapter of the past, it is a continuous thread in the fabric of human history, reminding us of the power of knowledge, community, and creativity. The story of Sumer would be incomplete without understanding its dynamic interactions with the neighboring peoples and cultures of the ancient Near East. The Sumerians, while innovators and pioneers in their own right, did not exist in isolation. Their world was a vibrant crossroads of trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange, and conflict, a network of city-states and regions constantly in flux, connected by rivers, trade routes, and shared ambitions. From the very beginning, the Sumerians engaged in extensive trade. Their agricultural output, particularly barley and dates, became commodities that extended far beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia. They traded these staples for raw materials they lacked, such as timber, metals, precious stones, and luxury goods. The Sumerians' location in southern Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, made their cities critical nodes in the trade networks stretching from Anatolia in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south. One of their most important trade partners was the region of Dilmun, believed to be located in modern-day Bahrain. Dilmun was described in Sumerian texts as a paradisiacal land, a place of pure water and fertile soil, and a critical hub for trade. Sumerian merchants established trading posts and sent expeditions across the Persian Gulf, bringing back copper from Oman, timber from the Levant, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. These expeditions were perilous, often requiring carefully planned sea voyages across dangerous waters, and trade agreements were formalized in meticulously recorded cuneiform tablets. The Sumerians were among the first to understand the power of trade, not just for material wealth, but for cultural enrichment. Through these exchanges, they encountered foreign customs, ideas, and technologies, which they eagerly adopted and adapted. For example, their use of the wheel, a revolutionary technology for transportation and pottery, may have been introduced or improved through contact with neighboring peoples. But trade was not always peaceful. Sumerian city-states were frequently embroiled in conflict with one another and with external groups. The region was fragmented, with cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Eridu often competing for land, water, and prestige. Warfare was a constant reality, and kings rose and fell by the sword as much as by inheritance or divine favor. The Sumerian king was expected to lead armies into battle, not merely as a strategist, but as a warrior, often depicted in bas-reliefs wielding bows or maces, trampling enemies beneath his feet. One of the most famous conflicts in Sumerian history was between the city-states of Lagash and Umma. The dispute centered on agricultural land and the control of irrigation canals, vital lifelines in an arid region where water determined survival. The Stele of the Vultures, an ancient limestone monument, records the victory of the Lagash king Irnatum over Umma in dramatic detail, illustrating the brutality of early warfare, as well as the desire to memorialize triumph through public art. Beyond conflicts between city-states, the Sumerians also faced invasions by external peoples. The Semitic Akkadians, led by the ambitious king Sargon of Akkad, eventually conquered the Sumerian city-states in the 24th century BCE, creating what is often regarded as the world's first empire. Sargon's rule represented a dramatic shift from fragmented city-states to centralized imperial control, but even as Akkadian rulers took political control, they adopted much of the Sumerian administrative and cultural systems. Akkadian became the lingua franca of administration, while cuneiform remained the script of government, literature, and record-keeping. The relationship between Sumerians and Akkadians was symbiotic. Akkadian kings embraced Sumerian religion, continuing the worship of Sumerian deities and incorporating them into their own pantheon. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally written in Sumerian, was translated into Akkadian and further expanded. This blending of cultures was not one of complete erasure, but of continuity and fusion. Sumerian literature, religious concepts, and legal principles were transmitted, preserved, and adapted by the new imperial structure. Even as the Akkadian Empire eventually fell, giving way to the rise of the Babylonian and Assyrian empires, the Sumerian influence endured. The Babylonians, particularly under King Hammurabi, continued the tradition of written law. Hammurabi's code, one of the most famous legal codes in ancient history, bore many structural similarities to earlier Sumerian codes. It was clear that the principle of codifying laws to regulate society was first articulated by the Sumerians and served as a model for generations. Trade remained an essential part of the Sumerian legacy. Caravans traveled long distances through deserts, across mountain passes, and along rivers, connecting Sumer to far-flung civilizations. Exotic goods, such as incense from Arabia, timber from Lebanon, and precious stones from distant lands flowed into Sumerian markets. This not only provided wealth, but also created a cosmopolitan atmosphere in the cities, where different languages, cultures, and traditions mingled. Cultural exchange also occurred through intermarriage, diplomacy, and the movement of craftsmen and scholars. Artifacts discovered in Sumerian sites bear stylistic influences from distant regions, suggesting that ideas about pottery design, metalwork, and even urban planning traveled along these trade routes. The flow of goods was matched by the flow of knowledge. Mathematical concepts, architectural techniques, and religious ideas diffused throughout the region, gradually creating a shared cultural and intellectual heritage that would shape Mesopotamia and beyond. The Sumerians' interaction with nature was also deeply practical. Their irrigation systems were marvels of engineering, designed to control the unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates. They constructed canals, levees, and reservoirs to manage water supply year-round. The agricultural calendar was closely tied to the movement of the stars, allowing them to predict planting and harvesting times. This combination of empirical observation and religious ritual underscored the Sumerian understanding of nature as a force both to be revered and harnessed. Interestingly, the Sumerians' understanding of disease and medicine reflected a blend of empirical knowledge and spiritual belief. Medical texts uncovered from excavations revealed detailed prescriptions for treating ailments such as wounds, digestive disorders, and eye infections. Some treatments involved herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and bandaging techniques, while others called for incantations and prayers to appease malevolent spirits believed to cause illness. This dual approach reveals a civilization in transition, moving from purely mystical explanations of the world towards systematic observation and practical treatment. As they dealt with external peoples and the natural world, the Sumerians began to see themselves as stewards of a divine order. Their myths often depicted humans as servants of the gods, created to perform labor and maintain the temples, with the hope of receiving divine favor in return. This worldview created a deep sense of duty and responsibility within their society. Life was seen as a cooperative venture between mankind and the cosmos, where each individual's work, no matter how small, was part of a greater cosmic balance. Through all these interactions, trade, war, diplomacy, cultural exchange, and spiritual belief, the Sumerians managed to create a dynamic, interconnected society. Their cities were far from isolated enclaves. They were hubs of commerce, ideas, and power in a broader web of human civilization. Even as political power shifted and their language faded, the systems they created continued to ripple outward, influencing the development of neighboring cultures and laying the foundations for the rise of empires that would shape the course of history for millennia. The legacy of the Sumerians stretches far beyond their political history or territorial conquests. At the very heart of their lasting influence lies their extraordinary intellectual and technological achievements. These accomplishments were not merely inventions of convenience, but deliberate innovations born from a profound desire to understand, organize, and shape the world around them. One of the Sumerians' most revolutionary contributions was their system of writing. Cuneiform, derived from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, was among the world's first writing systems. Its origins were surprisingly practical. Initially, small clay tokens were used to represent quantities of goods, a method that sufficed for simple transactions in early agricultural societies. However, as trade and administration became more complex, the need arose for a more flexible and precise system. Scribes, trained through years of study in temple schools, began using a stylus to impress wedge-shaped marks onto soft clay tablets. These marks evolved from pictographs, simple drawings of objects such as sheep or grain, into increasingly abstract symbols representing sounds, syllables, or entire words. The transition from pictographs to phonetic signs was a groundbreaking development, allowing the Sumerians to express not only objects and numbers, but also ideas, actions, and complex concepts. With the invention of writing came the ability to preserve knowledge across generations. Administrative records detailing grain distributions, tax collections, legal contracts, and labor assignments were meticulously kept on clay tablets. These records provided an unprecedented level of organization, enabling city-states to function efficiently, manage resources, and maintain social order. For the first time in history, human knowledge was no longer bound by memory or oral tradition alone. It could be stored, consulted, and transmitted. Beyond administration, the Sumerians used writing for literature, science, and religion. The Epic of Gilgamesh, now recognized as the oldest surviving work of literature, was originally composed in Sumerian. It tells the tale of Gilgamesh, a semi-mythical king, and his profound quest for immortality. His journey, marked by friendship, loss, and existential reflection, became a template for epic storytelling, exploring universal human questions in a way that transcended time and culture. Mathematics was another area where the Sumerians excelled. They developed a sexagesimal or base 60 numeral system, which might seem odd by today's base 10 standards but proved extraordinarily practical. This system facilitated calculations related to trade, astronomy, and construction. It explains why we still divide an hour into 60 minutes and a circle into 360 degrees, a legacy inherited directly from Sumer. Mathematical tablets discovered in sites such as Nippur revealed that the Sumerians had advanced knowledge of geometry and arithmetic. Problems written on these tablets ranged from calculating areas of fields and volumes of granaries to determining the dimensions of architectural structures. These calculations were not abstract exercises but practical tools for managing land, dividing inheritance, constructing temples, and conducting commerce. Astronomy was another discipline where Sumerian innovation was profound. They were among the first to systematically observe the movements of the stars, planets, and the phases of the moon. Their primary goal was practical, predicting the agricultural calendar, especially the timing of floods and planting seasons, yet their observations extended far beyond the immediate needs of agriculture. Detailed star charts and records of celestial phenomena were meticulously recorded on clay tablets. The Sumerians identified constellations and planets, developing an early form of astrology in which the movements of heavenly bodies were seen as reflections of divine will. These observations were not merely for mysticism, but served as a form of empirical knowledge. By noting the periodicity of the moon and its phases, they created one of the earliest lunar calendars, dividing the year into 12 months of 29 or 30 days. The Sumerian approach to knowledge was systematic. They categorized animals, plants, minerals, and diseases, creating proto-encyclopedic compilations of information. These early classifications formed the basis for later scientific thought in Mesopotamia, influencing Babylonian and Assyrian scholars who would come after them. Even their medical texts demonstrated a blend of empirical observation and ritual. The diagnostic methods often involved examining the patient's symptoms in great detail, prescribing herbal remedies, and reciting incantations to drive out disease-causing spirits. Perhaps the most remarkable testament to their organizational genius was the development of law. The earliest known legal codes emerged in Sumer, most notably the Code of Ur-Nammu, dated around 2100 BCE. Preceding the more famous Code of Hammurabi by centuries, Ur-Nammu's code provided a structured set of rules that regulated family life, property rights, trade, and criminal justice. What set the Sumerian legal codes apart was their unprecedented clarity and systematic approach. Each law was written explicitly, with defined penalties for specific offenses. For instance, the code stipulated fines for theft or assault, often payable in silver or other commodities. These legal tablets were not merely theoretical. They served as active references for judges and administrators, ensuring consistency in justice and societal order. Architecture, too, reflected the Sumerians' advanced thinking. Their cities were organized around the central temple complex, typically a massive ziggurat, a stepped pyramid with a flat platform at the top. These structures were not only places of worship, but also served as administrative centers. The ziggurat symbolized the link between earth and heaven, a physical representation of the Sumerians' belief in the divine order of the universe. The construction of these monumental buildings was itself a marvel of early engineering. Using sun-dried mud bricks, the Sumerians built expansive courtyards, thick walls, and massive terraces. Complex irrigation systems ran beneath their cities, channeling water from rivers to fields, ensuring agriculture could thrive even in a challenging environment. Roads were meticulously planned, and city layouts demonstrated an understanding of urban planning, accommodating both residential life and public spaces. Beyond the physical achievements, the Sumerians' cultural contributions are perhaps most profound in their understanding of myth, ritual, and the human condition. The myths told of a universe born from a chaotic, watery abyss, where gods like An, Enlil, and Enki shaped the land and humanity. These stories were not abstract tales. They were reflections of the Sumerians' relationship with their environment, expressing both reverence and a deep sense of responsibility. Their rituals were highly structured, with specific procedures for temple offerings, purification ceremonies, and seasonal festivals. These rituals often reenacted creation myths, symbolically maintaining the balance of the cosmos. The Akitu festival, held to celebrate the new year, combined prayers, sacrifices, processions, and dramatic recitations of mythological texts, reinforcing the connection between the people, their leaders, and the divine. Music and poetry flourished as well. The Sumerians composed hymns to their gods, personal laments and love songs, many of which have been preserved on clay tablets. These literary works provide us with a window into their emotional lives, revealing a people who celebrated joy, grieved loss, and sought meaning in the face of mortality. The lyrical qualities of these compositions are strikingly human, far removed from the cold pragmatism often attributed to ancient civilizations. Perhaps what makes the Sumerians' intellectual achievements so remarkable is the deliberate intent behind them. Every innovation, from writing to law to urban planning, was a purposeful effort to impose order on a chaotic world. It was not mere survival, but an ambitious attempt to transcend nature's unpredictability, to create a society where knowledge was not ephemeral, but lasting. As centuries passed, the Sumerian language itself slowly faded from everyday use, giving way to Akkadian and other Semitic languages. But their achievements did not vanish. They were inherited, copied, and reinterpreted by subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations, ensuring that the Sumerian spirit remained woven into the fabric of human history. The story of the Sumerians, as extraordinary as it is, inevitably leads us toward the chapter of decline, a slow, multifaceted process influenced by both internal challenges and external pressures. Like the ebbing of a great river, the might of Sumerian civilization began to recede, leaving behind a legacy that would echo for millennia. One of the first and most persistent problems the Sumerians faced was environmental degradation. The very irrigation systems that had made agriculture in the arid plains of Mesopotamia possible became a double-edged sword. Over centuries, the intensive irrigation led to the accumulation of salts in the soil, a process known as salinization. The Tigris and Euphrates, whose floodwaters were essential for replenishing the fields, gradually deposited more salt than could be naturally flushed away. As a result, the once fertile farmlands began to produce increasingly poor yields. Crops failed more frequently, leading to food shortages and economic instability. Alongside environmental challenges, political instability became a significant factor in Sumer's decline. The city-state system that had once allowed for flexibility and local governance began to falter under the strain of continuous warfare and shifting alliances. Each city, fiercely independent and proud of its patron deity, was constantly at odds with its neighbors. Kings rose and fell in rapid succession, often as a result of violent coups or invasions. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, the power of the Sumerian city-states had weakened considerably. In particular, the city of Ur, once a mighty center of culture, religion, and governance, began to lose its prominence. Internal strife compounded the external threats as rival factions vied for control of diminishing resources and prestige. The political fragmentation left Sumer vulnerable to external conquerors who sought the riches and strategic position of this ancient land. Among the most significant of these external threats were the Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people originating from the west, likely from the region of modern-day Syria and Palestine. The Amorites were not a centralized empire, but rather a collection of tribes and city-states. Over time, they infiltrated the Sumerian heartland, taking advantage of the political disarray and economic decline. Gradually, the Amorites established control over key cities, marking the beginning of a new era. The most emblematic shift came when Ur fell to the Amorites around 2000 BCE, signaling the end of the Sumerian political dominance. The dynasty of Ur, known as the Ur III period, was the last significant Sumerian ruling power. Although it briefly revitalized the Sumerian culture and administration, it was short-lived. The last king of the Ur-3 dynasty was overthrown, and Sumerian political authority dissipated, absorbed into the rising power of Babylon. Despite this political disappearance, the cultural and intellectual legacy of Sumer did not vanish. Sumerian became a sacred language, much like Latin in medieval Europe, used primarily for religious, scholarly, and ceremonial purposes. Temples continued to use Sumerian cuneiform to record hymns, incantations, and important religious texts for centuries beyond the fall of their political power. The Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires revered the Sumerians as the progenitors of civilization itself. They meticulously preserved Sumerian myths, literature, and legal principles, incorporating them into their own traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, was translated and copied repeatedly in Akkadian, evolving into a masterpiece of ancient world literature that would eventually influence Greek and later Western thought. Archaeological excavations of the 19th and 20th centuries revealed the profound depth of Sumerian civilization. The discovery of vast libraries of clay tablets, tens of thousands in number, provided modern scholars with an unprecedented look into their administrative, literary, and scientific world. These tablets covered everything from economic transactions and legal cases to astronomical observations and medical recipes. One of the most extraordinary finds was the collection of mathematical and astronomical texts, demonstrating the Sumerians' advanced understanding of geometry, algebra, and celestial cycles. It was from these early scholars that later Babylonian and Greek mathematicians would inherit concepts like the base 60 system and the division of the circle. Sumerian religious texts also survived the ages, revealing a pantheon that was both complex and deeply human. The gods of Sumer were not distant and unknowable forces, but personalities with their own flaws, ambitions, and rivalries. Myths recounted the creation of humanity by the god Enki and the goddess Ninhursag, the great flood sent by Enlil, and the doomed quest of Gilgamesh for eternal life. These stories, rich in symbolism and moral questioning, resonated across generations, influencing not only later Mesopotamian civilizations, but arguably even the major Abrahamic religions that would emerge millennia later. Yet as Sumer itself faded into history, its cities were slowly abandoned. The grand ziggurats, once the beating heart of civic and religious life, crumbled under the relentless march of time and erosion. The canals, once lifelines of irrigation and transportation, filled with silt and became unusable. The last native speakers of the Sumerian language passed away, their voices swallowed by history. But the physical remnants of Sumer endured. Mounds of mud brick walls, thousands of inscribed clay tablets, fragments of statuary and pottery. These silent witnesses stood as testaments to a people who had dared to dream of organizing their world, of mastering nature and destiny through knowledge, art, and faith. The Sumerians did not vanish. They were transformed, their essence woven into the fabric of all subsequent civilizations in the region. Even today, the influence of Sumer lingers. The very way we measure time, organize cities, codify laws, and record history owes a debt to their pioneering spirit. Modern archaeology continues to unearth new discoveries, offering ever deeper insights into their world, how they lived, worshipped, struggled, and created. Their story stands as a timeless reminder that civilization is not built in isolation. It is a continuous dialogue between nature, intellect, society, and the divine. The Sumerians, through their trials and triumphs, showed the power of human ingenuity, resilience, and imagination. They were the first to write history as we understand it today, not merely as a record of events, but as a reflection of humanity's enduring quest to understand itself. Among the most profound and revealing aspects of Sumerian culture are their myths and religious stories, narratives that served not only as entertainment, but as essential frameworks for understanding the cosmos, humanity's place within it, and the invisible forces that shaped daily life. These ancient myths were more than fanciful tales. They were considered sacred truths, passed down through generations, and carefully preserved in the temple libraries of cities like Nippur, Ur, and Eridu. At the heart of Sumerian belief was the idea that the universe was born from a primordial watery chaos, a concept familiar to many ancient cultures but uniquely developed by the Sumerians. In their creation myth, the universe began as an infinite dark expanse known as the Apsu, the freshwater abyss, and the Tiamat, the saltwater sea. From this chaotic union, the first gods emerged. These deities were not abstract forces but living beings, each with distinct personalities, desires, and rivalries. Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation, played a central role in many of the myths. He was both a trickster and a benefactor, deeply involved in shaping the earth and guiding humanity. According to the myth, it was Enki who, in a gesture of compassion, created humans from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god. This act was not one of arbitrary creation, but a deliberate attempt to provide the gods with servants, beings who would tend the land, maintain the temples, and uphold the cosmic order. One of the most significant Sumerian myths, which would later echo in other cultural traditions, was the story of the Great Flood. In the myth, the gods decided to destroy humanity through a massive deluge because humans had become too noisy and disruptive. Enki, however, warned one righteous man, often identified in later traditions as Yusudra or Utnapishtim, of the impending catastrophe. The man built a massive boat, preserved his family and samples of every living creature, and survived the flood. Afterward, the gods repented and made a covenant never to destroy humanity again by flood. This myth of a global flood would resurface in countless civilizations, most famously in the biblical story of Noah. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as perhaps the most comprehensive Sumerian literary achievement. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk and part divine, was initially portrayed as a tyrannical ruler whose cruelty prompted the gods to create Enkidu, a wild man, to challenge and eventually befriend him. Their friendship is a powerful exploration of human companionship, struggle, and transformation. Together, they embarked on epic adventures, defeating monstrous beings such as Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, and the bull of heaven sent by the goddess Inanna in a fit of anger. The turning point of the epic occurs with the death of Enkidu, an event that plunges Gilgamesh into profound grief and existential questioning. Consumed by the fear of mortality, Gilgamesh sets out on a desperate quest to find Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood, hoping to learn the secret of eternal life. However, after arduous trials and encounters with supernatural beings, Gilgamesh ultimately realizes that immortality is reserved for the gods, and that his true legacy lies in the enduring city he governs, the walls of Uruk, and the culture he has nurtured. The Sumerians did not view their gods as wholly benevolent or malevolent, but rather as entities whose whims and conflicts mirrored human nature. Inanna, the most prominent goddess in their pantheon, embodied contradictions: love and war, fertility and destruction, compassion and vengeance. Her descent into the underworld and subsequent return symbolized the seasonal cycle of life and death, a metaphor for agricultural renewal, but also a profound meditation on sacrifice and rebirth. The tension between order and chaos was central to Sumerian thought. The gods were seen as custodians of order, their temples serving as microcosms of the universe. Priests performed rituals daily to sustain this order, offering food, drink, and prayers to ensure the gods remained pleased and the cosmic balance intact. Any failure to perform these rituals correctly could result in divine displeasure, manifesting as droughts, plagues, or invasions. In their cosmology, the Sumerians perceived the heavens as a domed structure above a flat earth, with the sun god Utu traveling across the sky in a solar boat, illuminating the world and providing light for human life. The moon god Nanna governed time and the calendar, his cycles determining months and religious festivals. These celestial bodies were not distant and abstract. They were active participants in a living, breathing universe, their movements carefully observed and recorded. Death, in Sumerian belief, was not an end, but a transition to a shadowy existence in the netherworld, a bleak underworld ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. There, the dead subsisted on dust and lamentation, far removed from the vibrant life they once knew. The Sumerians did not see the afterlife as a place of punishment or reward, but as a somber, inevitable continuation of existence. This stoic view of mortality reinforced their focus on making the most of earthly life, building cities, crafting laws, recording knowledge, and honoring the gods. Sumerian art and iconography provide further insight into their religious mindset. Statues of gods and kings often depicted them with large, staring eyes, symbolizing eternal vigilance and divine presence. Cylinder seals, intricately carved and rolled across clay tablets, were used to sign documents and protect property, often depicting mythological scenes, gods battling monsters, the sacred tree of life, or rituals of worship. These small but intricate artifacts reflect the profound importance the Sumerians placed on order, symbolism, and the sacred in everyday life. Even the Sumerian understanding of numbers and measurements was entwined with their religious and cosmological worldview. Their sexagesimal system reflected a desire for harmonious divisions of time and space, a mathematical echo of the order imposed by the gods. The 7-day week, divisions of hours and minutes, and the calculation of lunar months were not random inventions, but deliberate constructs to synchronize human activity with the movements of the heavens. This deep integration of myth, ritual, and practical life reveals the Sumerians' holistic worldview. Every aspect of their society, from the structure of the family to the administration of the city, was imbued with meaning. The mundane task of recording a grain delivery was as sacred as composing an epic poem, because both acts contributed to the maintenance of divine order. As the centuries passed, these myths continued to shape the cultural identity of Mesopotamia. Even after the Sumerian language fell out of daily use, scholars and priests copied and preserved these ancient stories, ensuring their survival. They became part of the shared memory of humanity, a reflection of our earliest attempts to answer life's most profound questions. Our journey will now turn toward the remarkable artifacts and archaeological discoveries that have allowed modern scholars to reconstruct the world of the Sumerians. Clay tablets, statues, ziggurats, and tools that speak of a civilization at once ancient and strikingly advanced. These tangible remnants allow us to piece together not just the history of Sumer, but the story of human ambition, creativity, and endurance. The rediscovery of the Sumerian world began in earnest during the 19th century, as the sands of Mesopotamia slowly gave up their ancient secrets to determined archaeologists. At first, many scholars and explorers had only vague notions of a lost civilization buried beneath the earth. Yet as excavations began, layer by layer, clay tablets, architectural ruins, and priceless artifacts emerged, shedding light on a culture that had long been thought lost to time. One of the most significant archaeological breakthroughs occurred at the ancient city of Ur, located near the modern-day city of Nasiriyah in southern Iraq. Excavations led by British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s and 1930s unearthed a remarkable trove of Sumerian treasures. The discovery of the royal tombs of Ur was perhaps the most dramatic revelation. Hundreds of burial sites that contain not only the remains of kings and queens, but also a wealth of material culture that spoke of extraordinary craftsmanship and profound religious beliefs. Among the most famous finds were the elaborate grave goods, golden lyres adorned with intricate inlays of lapis lazuli and shell, ceremonial headdresses, finely wrought jewelry, and exquisitely detailed statues, These artifacts painted a picture of a society that revered its rulers and viewed death as a sacred transition. The tombs suggested that powerful individuals were buried with servants, animals, and luxurious goods, illustrating the belief in a continued existence beyond death, where status and possessions accompanied one into the afterlife. The clay tablets unearthed at sites such as Nippur, Eridu, and Lagash became invaluable to scholars. Thousands of these tablets, covered in the distinctive wedge-shaped impressions of cuneiform writing, revealed the remarkable sophistication of Sumerian administration. Records of agricultural production, taxation, labor contracts, and temple offerings provided an unparalleled glimpse into the organization of early city-states. One particularly striking set of tablets detailed the work of scribes, individuals who spent years learning the complex cuneiform system. Becoming a scribe was no small feat. It required extensive training, memorization, and practice. In Sumerian society, scribes held an elite status, acting as the intermediaries between rulers, priests, and the general populace. Their role was essential in maintaining the bureaucracy, documenting decisions, and preserving cultural knowledge. The fact that scribes meticulously recorded even the smallest details of daily transactions underscores how advanced Sumer was in understanding the power of written information. Beyond administrative records, the tablets also revealed a rich literary tradition. Hymns, proverbs, incantations, and epic tales were copied and recopied, some by professional scribes working in temple schools. These writings were not only religious but also educational, serving as tools for instruction, memorization, and reflection. The Epic of Gilgamesh tablets stood out as literary masterpieces, combining poetic structure, moral dilemmas, and deeply human emotions. Archaeologists also uncovered the remains of the grand ziggurats, massive terraced structures that towered over Sumerian cities. The ziggurat of Ur, perhaps the most well-preserved, revealed the architectural genius of the Sumerians. Constructed from sun-dried and kiln-fired bricks, the ziggurat stood as a symbol of divine authority. Its steep staircases led priests to the temple at the summit, where rituals and offerings were conducted to honor the gods. The very design of the ziggurat embodied the Sumerians' belief in the connection between heaven and earth, serving as a cosmic axis linking the mortal realm to the divine. Pottery, too, provided a window into everyday life. Archaeologists found a wide variety of ceramic vessels, simple cooking pots, elaborately painted jars, and finely crafted cups, each serving a specific purpose. The stylistic evolution of pottery over time illustrated changing artistic tastes, technological advancement, and trade influences. Some pieces displayed motifs of animals, plants, and geometric patterns, revealing an aesthetic appreciation deeply woven into practical objects. Excavations also revealed early examples of metallurgy and tool-making. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was used extensively to produce tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. This technology represented a significant step forward from the earlier use of stone implements. The ability to shape metals allowed Sumerians to craft plows, chisels, swords, and intricate jewelry with unprecedented precision. Metal objects found in royal tombs demonstrated not only technical mastery, but also symbolic significance, often inscribed with the names of gods or kings. The discovery of seals, particularly cylinder seals, was another remarkable archaeological insight. These small cylindrical objects were intricately carved with scenes of myth, worship, and daily life. When rolled across wet clay, they left detailed impressions that served as personal signatures or official stamps. The designs on these seals were often elaborate, depicting complex interactions between humans and gods, battles, or pastoral scenes, offering scholars invaluable clues about Sumerian beliefs, social structure, and aesthetics. Among the most evocative finds were the remains of Sumerian tools and household items. The presence of plows, irrigation equipment, and agricultural implements revealed a deep understanding of engineering and environmental adaptation. Handheld tools made from bronze, flint, and bone showed that the Sumerians developed specialized instruments for farming, construction, and craftwork. Their ability to manipulate materials and create efficient systems reflected an intricate balance of trial, observation, and ingenuity. The archaeological discoveries also revealed the complexity of Sumerian society. Large public buildings, including granaries, administrative offices, and storehouses, highlighted the degree of organization required to manage a densely populated urban environment. The layout of cities demonstrated an early understanding of urban planning, with streets, residential areas, workshops, and public spaces deliberately arranged to support the social and economic needs of the population. Even the human remains provided insight. Analysis of skeletons showed that life in Sumer was harsh and often short. The average lifespan was relatively low, and many individuals bore the marks of strenuous physical labor. However, the care taken in burial practices indicated a profound respect for the dead and a belief in an ongoing spiritual journey. As more tablets were translated, scholars were able to reconstruct not only the day-to-day workings of Sumerian life, but also the broader intellectual and philosophical concerns of the civilization. Their extensive lists of plants, animals, and minerals resembled early attempts at classification, foreshadowing the development of science. Their detailed observations of astronomical phenomena revealed an empirical method of understanding the cosmos, blending observation with ritual significance. These archaeological discoveries did more than illuminate an ancient civilization. They created a bridge between past and present. Each clay tablet, each broken statue, each fragment of pottery was a voice from antiquity, speaking of human ambition, creativity, struggle, and resilience. The deeper scholars delved, the clearer it became that Sumer was not merely the first civilization in a geographical sense, but the first to consciously shape the course of history through knowledge, writing, and law. In the silent mounds of Ur, Nippur, and Lagash, the echoes of a remarkable people could still be heard. People who first dared to ask what it meant to be human, what it meant to govern, to worship, to build, and to dream. These archaeological remnants were not just relics of a bygone era. They were pieces of a puzzle that showed humanity's earliest steps toward understanding itself. The Sumerians were not only builders of cities and scribes of history, but pioneers of science, mathematics, and astronomy. Long before the Greeks debated geometry or the Babylonians charted planetary movements, the Sumerians laid the first practical and theoretical groundwork for understanding the world through observation, calculation, and systematic thought. At the heart of Sumerian scientific achievement was their numerical system. Unlike the simple counting methods of earlier agrarian societies, the Sumerians developed a sexagesimal system based on the number 60. This base 60 system was not arbitrary but practical, as 60 is highly divisible, allowing for easy calculation of fractions. Even today, we still inherit this legacy. Our division of an hour into 60 minutes, a minute into 60 seconds, and the 360 degrees of a circle all stem from this ancient system. Mathematical tablets discovered in cities like Nippur and Ur reveal that the Sumerians were well versed in complex calculations. These tablets contain multiplication tables, formulas for calculating areas and volumes, and even early algebraic problems. One tablet, for instance, provides a method to compute the area of irregular fields, showing an understanding of geometry that was advanced for its time. Their mathematical knowledge wasn't purely theoretical. It served practical purposes crucial to managing irrigation, land division, construction, and trade. The Sumerians calculated the precise measurements of canals to regulate water flow, ensuring that crops received the necessary moisture without flooding the fields. They used geometry to design buildings, particularly the monumental ziggurats, whose proportions reflected an advanced understanding of structural engineering. Astronomy was another domain where Sumerian thought broke new ground. Driven by the need to predict the seasons for agriculture and religious festivals, the Sumerians developed one of the earliest systematic observations of the heavens. Their astronomers carefully charted the movements of the moon, planets, and stars, recording celestial phenomena in clay tablets that acted as star maps. The lunar calendar was central to Sumerian timekeeping. They recognized that the moon went through regular phases, from new moon to full moon and back, over roughly 29.5 days. This cyclical pattern allowed them to organize the year into 12 lunar months, though adjustments were necessary to align it with the solar year. This early calendrical system was critical for timing agricultural activities, festivals, and religious observances, particularly the Akitu festival, which celebrated the new year and the renewal of divine order. What set the Sumerians apart was their empirical approach to the stars. They recorded planetary movements with precision, noting the retrograde motion of planets such as Venus. Their observations were not mystical, but methodical, tracking the positions of celestial bodies night after night, and compiling data that later Babylonian and Greek astronomers would study and refine. The Sumerians were, in many ways, the first astronomers, establishing a tradition of celestial observation that would become a cornerstone of science. Medicine in Sumer was a blend of empirical practice and spiritual belief. Medical clay tablets show detailed descriptions of symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. Physicians used natural remedies, herbs, oils, and poultices, often recording the effects of various treatments for specific ailments. Yet treatment was never purely mechanical. Disease was believed to be caused by evil spirits or divine punishment. So rituals and incantations accompanied medicinal prescriptions. The role of the physician was thus twofold: healer and priest, tending both body and spirit. The Sumerians were also adept engineers. Their ability to manipulate the environment for agriculture was perhaps their greatest scientific achievement. They constructed intricate irrigation systems, channeling the Tigris and Euphrates rivers through a network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs. This complex system enabled them to sustain agriculture in the harsh, arid plains of southern Mesopotamia, turning deserts into productive farmland. The design of these irrigation networks required careful calculation and understanding of topography and water pressure. They constructed sluices and gates to control water flow, preventing both drought and flooding. The canals served not only agricultural purposes, but also as arteries of trade and communication, allowing goods, people, and ideas to flow freely between cities. Surveying was another advanced practice. The Sumerians measured land with remarkable accuracy, dividing fields into standardized units and recording measurements on clay tablets. They understood the importance of accurate measurement for taxation, land ownership, and construction. Some tablets included detailed diagrams of land plots, indicating the length and breadth in standardized units and calculating areas using geometric formulas. Even their understanding of time reflected sophistication. Sumerians divided the day into 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night, inspired by their base 60 system. Sundials and water clocks, known as clepsydras, were used to measure the passage of time, allowing for regulated work hours, religious rituals, and scheduled governance. Sumerian scientific thinking was also evident in their systematic approach to knowledge. They categorized plants, animals, diseases, and minerals in extensive lists, an early attempt at classification. Such efforts foreshadowed the later development of biology and chemistry. These lists weren't just for record-keeping, but served practical and educational purposes, enabling scribes and scholars to pass down knowledge in a structured and accessible form. The influence of Sumerian science did not end with their civilization. Their innovations were adopted and adapted by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and later civilizations in Mesopotamia. The Babylonian astronomers, for example, refined Sumerian observations into more sophisticated models of planetary motion. Greek scholars, much later, would build upon these foundations, laying the groundwork for modern mathematics and astronomy. The Sumerian belief in the harmonious order of the cosmos, maintained through ritual and knowledge, left a profound legacy. They saw science not as a separate endeavor, but as intertwined with religion, governance, and daily life. Their achievements were practical and philosophical, driven by the idea that by understanding the world's mechanisms, humans could maintain balance, predict change, and perhaps even control destiny itself. This profound blend of empirical observation, practical application, and philosophical inquiry stands as one of the most remarkable aspects of Sumerian civilization. It reveals a people whose curiosity and ingenuity shaped the trajectory of human thought long before modern science as we know it came into existence. The enduring legacy of the Sumerians extends far beyond their own time, reaching across centuries to influence countless civilizations that followed. Though the political power of Sumer vanished, their ideas, inventions, and cultural achievements became the foundation upon which Mesopotamia and eventually the wider world were built. It is a testament to the remarkable ingenuity of a people who, thousands of years ago, transformed a harsh and unpredictable landscape into the cradle of civilization. The Akkadians, who rose to prominence shortly after the decline of Sumer, adopted the Sumerian system of writing, cuneiform, for their own language. They translated and preserved Sumerian literary and religious texts, ensuring that the myths, hymns, and epic tales survived long after the Sumerian tongue ceased to be spoken. This intellectual continuity demonstrates that the Sumerians were not merely the first to build cities. They were the first to think systematically about human knowledge, society, and the cosmos. Babylonians in turn inherited Sumerian administrative systems, legal codes, and scientific knowledge. Hammurabi's famous law code, for instance, drew upon Sumerian legal principles, refining them into a comprehensive system of justice that would influence legal traditions for millennia. In the realm of astronomy, the Babylonians expanded upon Sumerian celestial observations, creating increasingly sophisticated models of planetary motion, eclipses, and the calendar, which in turn inspired Greek and later Islamic astronomers. Mathematics, too, carried forward the Sumerian base 60 system, shaping the development of geometry, algebra, and arithmetic throughout the ancient world. Culturally, the myths and stories of Sumer continued to resonate. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originally written in Sumerian, became a seminal text in the broader Mesopotamian literary tradition. Its exploration of friendship, mortality, heroism, and the human desire for immortality captured universal themes that transcended time and geography. Even the flood narrative, first recorded by the Sumerians, would find echoes in later traditions, most notably in the biblical story of Noah. These stories are more than relics. They are a mirror reflecting humanity's earliest attempts to understand life, death, and the divine. The influence of Sumer is also evident in urban planning, architecture, and governance. The design of Sumerian cities, with their streets, temples, administrative buildings, and complex irrigation systems, served as models for subsequent civilizations in Mesopotamia and beyond. The concept of a centralized authority, supported by bureaucracy and record-keeping, was one of Sumer's most lasting contributions. It demonstrated that human societies could organize themselves on a scale larger than individual villages, coordinating agriculture, trade, and religion to sustain dense populations. Sumerian religion, though absorbed and adapted by later cultures, left profound marks on theology and ritual practice. Concepts of divine kingship, the pantheon of anthropomorphic gods, and the idea that humans existed to serve higher powers were woven into the fabric of Babylonian and Assyrian spirituality. Temples remained central to civic life, acting as economic hubs, administrative centers, and sacred spaces, echoing the Sumerian belief that the prosperity of cities depended upon maintaining harmony with the divine. Even in art and material culture, Sumerian influence persisted. Cylinder seals, jewelry, statues, and pottery continued to inspire craftsmen for centuries. The attention to detail, symbolic richness, and integration of aesthetic beauty with functional purpose became hallmarks of Mesopotamian artistry. Through these objects, the Sumerians communicated not only information, but values, beliefs, and social hierarchies to successive generations. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Sumer's legacy is the very idea of civilization itself. By organizing urban centers, developing writing, codifying laws, observing the heavens, and recording stories, the Sumerians created a model of society that others could emulate. They demonstrated that humanity could harness the natural world, devise systems of knowledge, and aspire to immortality through culture, science, and art. Every tablet uncovered, every ziggurat excavated, and every myth preserved is a testament to this profound achievement. Modern archaeology and scholarship have allowed us to reconstruct this civilization in remarkable detail. The ruins of Ur, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur speak of cities bustling with life, temples resplendent with offerings, and streets teeming with commerce and ritual. Clay tablets reveal the minutiae of daily existence, grain distributions, labor records, trade agreements, and lessons for young scribes. Statues and reliefs show figures of gods, kings, and ordinary citizens, frozen in time, their expressions and postures conveying a deep understanding of human emotion and spirituality. What is particularly striking is the universality of the Sumerian experience. Despite the distance of millennia, their concerns, the need for food, security, social order, and meaning, resonate deeply with our own. Their stories of heroism, friendship, divine justice, and mortality remind us that while technologies change and empires rise and fall, the fundamental questions of existence remain constant. In this way, Sumer becomes more than an ancient civilization. It becomes a mirror of humanity itself. As the night deepens and our thoughts drift in the quietude of reflection, the Sumerians whisper across time. Their rivers still flow in memory, their temples still reach skyward in imagination, and their words, etched in clay, continue to speak. They were the architects of cities, the first writers of history, the early observers of the stars, and the dreamers who dared to imagine a world ordered, known, and celebrated. They remind us that human ingenuity, curiosity, and the desire to understand the universe are timeless qualities, ones that persist in every civilization that follows. In remembering Sumer, we remember not only the origins of society, but the enduring human spirit. The plains of Mesopotamia, once home to this remarkable civilization, hold the echoes of laborers tending canals, priests offering prayers, scribes pressing styluses into clay, and kings walking the streets of Uruk with the weight of responsibility and ambition. Every artifact, every story, every astronomical observation is a testament to a people who sought to master the natural and the divine, leaving a legacy that continues to inform and inspire. As sleep deepens and your mind drifts gently into rest, consider the quiet majesty of Sumer. Imagine walking through the streets of Ur, passing by the towering ziggurats, hearing the murmur of temple rituals, and feeling the pulse of a civilization that, though ancient, shaped the path of human history. Their achievements, struggles, and stories are not distant. They are a living part of our shared human heritage, whispering lessons of resilience, ingenuity, and the profound beauty of creation itself. And so, as the stars rise over the plains of Mesopotamia, just as they did thousands of years ago, the story of Sumer rests in our hearts, a timeless journey through the dawn of civilization, a testament to human curiosity, creativity, and the enduring quest to understand the world and ourselves. Let your mind drift with this story. carrying the echoes of Ur, Eridu, and Lagash into your dreams as you travel across time and space, guided by the legacy of a people who were truly the first architects of human history.